Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
we saw the good, the bad, and the ugly in this program.
E-scooters are coming back, but some older people say they're the ones who'll have to clean up the mess. That and more from today's City Council meeting.
I have a social responsibility to the people that are here because I come from here.
How residents are working to revitalize empty spaces in North Lawndale. That and more from Chicago's West Side.
How former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan ran Illinois for decades. We talk with the host of a new podcast documenting the leader's rise and fall.
Comic books are increasingly including the LGBTQ community. We discuss the announcement that Superman's son, John Kent, is bisexual.
Fake to Jones. Rogers looking around, firing, end zone, caught for the touchdown.
The Bears and the Aaron Rodgers-led Green Bay Packers resumed the oldest rivalry in football on Soldier Field on Sunday.
Resilience, we are strong.
And the Chicago Children's Choir on their 65 years of history and music making and its latest collaboration.
And as you mentioned, I'm in North Lawndale as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Now located on Chicago's west side, about 20 minutes from the Loop, North Lawndale is a neighborhood that has dealt with decades of disinvestment and abandoned spaces. Now community members have taken things into their own hands by creating community gardens and safe spaces for the next generation. We'll speak with residents and leaders of nonprofits to hear how they're tackling systemic issues the community is facing. But first, I send it back to you.
Thanks, Joanna. And now to some of today's top stories. Police officers and other city workers have one day to comply with the city's vaccine mandate, but the union representing rank-and-file police officers shows no signs of backing off its opposition. FOP President John Catanzara said again today he advises officers not to comply and warned that as many as half could fail to report for work if the mandate stays in place. The mayor says officers that don't upload their vaccine status to the city's labor portal will be moved to no pay status, but the police department says that will not happen right away or over this weekend. Lightfoot says she doesn't believe the city will be depleted of police to the point it would need to call in the National Guard.
My expectation is that people who swore an oath to serve and protect the city are going to honor that oath. And they're going to show up, they're going to report for duty, and they're going to comply with a legal directive from the city and an order from the police department. Anything less would be insubordination.
As you saw earlier, e-scooters get the green light to return to city streets. After robust debate, City Council passes the ordinance to permanently allow the scooter sharing program, this time expanding it to downtown and to the 606 trail, among other areas. 3 companies will get the go-ahead to operate about 6,000 rental scooters throughout the city. We'll have much more on this and other City Council action in just a bit. Mayor Lori Lightfoot has words of praise for outgoing Inspector General Joe Ferguson. In an op-ed in the Tribune, the mayor says she's grateful to Ferguson for more than a decade of good governance. Lightfoot acknowledged that the two disagreed at times, but that Ferguson, quote, raised the standards and expertise of the office. Ferguson was confirmed to the post in 2009 and will step down tomorrow. A 5-person committee appointed jointly by the mayor and city council is charged with finding his replacement. And up next, more on those e-scooters and the rest of today's action from City Council. So please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Shared e-scooters get the green light to return to Chicago streets this spring. This after City Council voted to approve the project. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon was there and joins us now with more details on that and other happenings from today's City Council meeting. Heather, welcome back. So first, let's hear from Transportation Committee Chair Alderman Howard Brookins about today's passing of the shared scooter project.
I believe that if we're going to talk the talk, we need to walk the walk. And that, one, our environment is slowly dying, and we really need to do anything that we can to go to electrification. There is a learning curve, and there are going to be some growing pains, and I'm not going to tell anybody that we're going to get it right immediately, but ultimately I believe that we are stepping in the right direction for our city and for the environment.
So Heather, what can Chicagoans expect this spring?
Well, once the winter eases, 6,000 scooters could hit the streets, and they will be allowed to go anywhere in the city except the Lakefront Trail. Now, during the city's 2 pilot programs of a shared e-scooter program, the scooters were banned from downtown and the 606 Trail, but the scooters will be allowed to go anywhere, although there are rules in place to ensure that there are e-scooters on the south and west side under Mayor Lori Lightfoot's commitment to equity to make sure that this isn't just in tourist-heavy areas of the city.
But we know that there was also some opposition. Let's take a listen to that.
I have concerns that we're going to continue to see a rise of where I have to go out or send someone from my staff to go out to report these issues to 311, to try to hold them accountable, to focus on being the scooter police, when I have more than enough to do in my ward as alderman.
Heather, I think some of us remember those funny posts of scooter fails. Does this plan address any of these concerns?
Well, it attempts to. During the first pilot program of the scooter test, the scooters could just be left anywhere. They didn't have to be locked up. The second pilot program required riders to lock up their scooters. And when this program starts in the spring, that will again be the rules. Now, the scooters have always been banned on sidewalks to protect pedestrians and those in wheelchairs. The scooters that will hit the streets in the spring will have an alarm similar to the "you're not wearing your seatbelt" alarm that you hear in cars to make sure that people don't ride them on the sidewalks. Now, several aldermen are skeptical that that will keep scooters off the sidewalks, especially in areas like Edgewater, where Sheridan Road is known as being a somewhat perilous place for pedestrians and bikers vying for that beautiful lakefront access. So a lot of aldermen had concerns that the program doesn't do enough to give them enough control over what happens in their ward, a perennial complaint of alder people.
So moving on to the budget, of course, the mayor spoke about her proposed budget after today's meeting. Let's listen to some of that.
This budget will do a lot, and we need everyone to join in. So if you're listening and you believe, as I do, that this is an important moment for us to move forward together, to make a statement that will resound for generations to come about what we can do to change the trajectory of people's lives in this city, call your alderman and tell them, vote for the budget.
Heather, any action on this? What's next?
Well, today was the public hearing, which was Chicagoans' only opportunity to weigh in on the $16.7 billion budget. And there were 2 notable speakers. One, Lawrence Mazzal from the Civic Federation, a nonpartisan watchdog group, endorsed the budget plan, but said that he remains concerned about the city's long-term financial position because the city has huge pension bills and a lot of debt. Also voicing opposition was Jack Lavin, the CEO of the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, saying that small businesses cannot handle the property tax hike, which is included in this budget. And that property tax is designed to cover the rise in the cost of inflation, as well as to start paying off the city's massive infrastructure program that was approved as part of last year's budget. So those are 2 really big issues that we will have to wait and see. The next meeting is set for October 25th. And the budget is expected to be adopted by Halloween. So we're moving pretty fast here.
Okay. And also, did City Council pass any other measures today?
They did. They issued the final landmark status for the home of blues icon Muddy Waters. He lived and recorded in a North Oakland 2-flat, which will be permanently preserved as a museum thanks to the work of his great-granddaughter. And it is designed to pay homage to all of the Chicagoans who made the blues such a cultural impact from Chicago, and to recognize those African Americans who moved to Chicago as part of the Great Migration just several decades ago.
Okay, Heather Sharon, busy day at City Hall for you. Thanks as always.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's at WTTW.com/news. North Lawndale has a rich history, but also a long cycle of violence and poverty that's plagued the West Side neighborhood for decades. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez spent the day in North Lawndale as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. She joins us now to tell us about the work that people are doing to change the direction of the community. Joanna.
Brian, is the time that I've spent here talking to people, I can tell you that there's real work happening here, from the bigger projects to the smaller ones like Bike Box, a bicycle sharing program that is accessible to people who live here. This is just one of many initiatives creating positive change.
I know that personally, being a black man from Chicago, that in order to see change, you have to be the change. And the number one thing that I could think of myself is honestly just to be present.
Robert Welch runs the Wyman bike sharing program on Pulaski Road, a vision he had since he was a teenager.
One of my friends was shot for walking down the street, and there was no drug relations. He was a kid like me, and that was the moment where it's just like things like that happens every day, and there's no like nobody is trying to change that directly, or it has to start somewhere. So that was my first awakening to wanting to be a greater challenge to the community.
As a kid, Welch was part of the Young Men Organization, a program aimed at giving kids a safe space to learn through a variety of programs. The Bike Box is free for residents to borrow bikes, fix bikes, and buy them at a low price.
The biggest part about how I feel the connection is going is those events right there. There's 4 or 5 people that have now started to come help out free of their own will. And it's just because it provides a community event where they can reach out to different people in the community, do projects, and feel like they're actually giving back in a way that's actually beneficial.
This year, Wyman was chosen to be part of the Chicago Architecture Biennial. Architects from around the globe worked with local community groups to come up with different ways to utilize empty spaces. Wyman used a shipping container to create an outdoor space for people to use.
The Wyman organization had a whole group of teenagers who were there who helped us paint all the surfaces, help us put the planter beds together. So I want people to feel what is the power of community, what's the power of seeing things in just a little bit different way.
In recent years, there has been a big push to help struggling communities in the South and West Sides by reinvesting in neighborhoods like North Lawndale. Cornelius Gritz, president of GMA Construction Group, once was a kid growing up on the South Side and now runs a company determined to revitalize Chicago neighborhoods.
I grew up in foster care my entire life, from the time I was 9 until I was 21 years old. Because I bounced around, I gained a sense of grit and a sense of determination that I knew I wanted better.
GMA Construction is gearing up to transform this vacant lot into 60 mixed-income apartments, townhouses, retail, restaurant space, and a community center with an outdoor plaza. It's one of multiple projects selected by the city for the Invest Southwest initiative.
I want people on my project who are representative of where I've come from, who look like me, who sound like me, who have been through some of the same struggles as me, so that they can have that opportunity to go out and be successful.
North Lawndale has a crime rate that has long overshadowed the rich history the neighborhood holds. BBF Family Services has been in the community for 62 years.
We can see the change going on right now, and it's only going to get better and better.
And it's going to take the community, it's going to take stakeholders, it's going to take elected officials, it's going to take government, it's going to take all hands on deck to make North Lawndale what it should be.
Angela Williams was a teenager when he started at BBF and now owns his own film production company.
With BBF being so thoroughly invested in its youth and its participants, like outside of high school, they also hooked us up with internships that really developed me greatly, and I'm like extremely grateful.
Williams' story is one of hundreds that leaders at BBF are proud of.
I believe young people can only be what they see, and if they can't see positivity, it's hard for them to live positive lives. And so I believe BBF is a beacon of hope.
At 27 years old, Williams hopes that other young men will take advantage of what organizations like BBF have to offer.
Just discover, be open to direction, and cultivate the hidden resources and blessings that surround you.
Yeah, and William also shares that because of this program, he has been able to travel to places he never thought he would go to. And stay tuned, we are speaking with one of the founders of Wyman and learning more about the bike sharing program and other programs that they offer. But first, I send it back to you.
Joanna, thank you. And now to Paris and a new podcast Illinois political junkies may want to check out. Paris.
Yeah, it's absolutely right, Brandis. Former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan ruled state politics for decades. Amid the expanding Comet bribery scheme investigation, Madigan stepped down from two powerful positions this year, the speakership and his role as chair of the Illinois Democratic Party. A new podcast from the Better Government Association tells the story of Madigan and how he ran Illinois politics for so long. And our very own Amanda Vinicky is one of the many journalists featured in it. And joining us to talk about the podcast is Justin Kaufman, producer and host of The Madigan Rule. He's also a reporter for Axios Chicago. Justin, good to see you.
And good to see you, Paris. Thanks for having me.
All right, it's good to have you. All right, so your podcast takes listeners all the way back to Madigan's early days in politics, starting with his time as a garbage truck worker. Explain that.
Well, he grew up on the southwest side of Chicago, down by Midway Airport, the 13th Ward, which is the 22nd District, which he represented. And, he came from a family that was political. He had a dad who was a precinct captain, and his first job was he got on the back of a garbage truck. And he worked his way up. He did internships in the law and, in the law office. And he got involved with Mayor Richard J. Daley at the time and found himself as a delegate actually sent to work on the Illinois Constitutional Convention in Springfield in 1970. And that's kind of how he got his start. And, it really is a story about a Chicago, kid who rose the ranks and became a Chicago politician, who became essentially a ward boss, who became the Speaker of the House. Not just the Speaker of the House, the longest serving state House Speaker in American history, not just Illinois, American history.
America. So what did he learn in those early days that sort of planted the seeds to where he would become so successful as a party boss?
Well, the old adage is all politics is local, but, Mike Madigan took it to the next level. The supersizing of constituent services, making sure that everybody in the 13th Ward was taken care of. And I'm not just saying picking up garbage or making sure potholes are fixed. I was making sure that their kids had jobs, and everyone was essentially, if you worked for the Madigan machine and the Madigan organization, you were able to find I don't want to say reward, but be able to take advantage of patronage, which was the big sort of prize at the time when it came to Chicago politics. So I think obviously super serving his constituents, but then loyalty and discipline and just being around some really impressive political minds. You mentioned Richard J. Daley as the mayor at the time. He also sparred with, in the early days, he learned, he studied under a lot of impressive names, including Phil Rock, including, he was peers with a young Governor Edgar, who was a state rep at the time. And there's a lot of great stories that are told by former governors and lawmakers, current and former, about those days of him coming up.
Yeah, he actually had a good working relationship with the former Republican governor, Jim Edgar. And, that loyalty was built not through hard power or threats, but it seems like through rewarding of jobs. And in your podcast, you talk about how he spent a lot of his workday actually checking up on folks that did work for him or did political work for him and making sure they were set up with jobs.
That was the way it was. That was politics back in the day, right? Before the Shackman Decree essentially outlawed and made it illegal that you could reward campaign workers with state jobs, that was what you did. So yeah, he wanted to make sure that he had jobs open at different departments in the state. He wanted to make sure that meant the city. He was all over the place in making sure that his people were taken care of. And in return, they worked harder for him. And right now, the tentacles. You think about the tentacles about all of state government. There's not an office untouched that doesn't have someone that Madigan sent.
They're at every level of government, municipalities, townships, all over the place. Justin, what did you learn that surprised you? There's so much that's been reported on Madigan over the years. Anything from talking to people that worked with him that kind of shocked you?
You and I have covered Mike Madigan our entire careers, and you get to a certain point where you think you've heard it all, or you follow the political characterizations are of him. I learned a ton about who he was as a human being, but also just who he was behind closed doors, how he acted when he was working with his not just his allies, but his foes. What I found interesting was how much reverence and respect that old Republicans gave to Mike Madigan. And I mean former governors, George Ryan, former governors, Jim Edgar. They didn't talk of him as maybe a Bruce Rauner would. They didn't talk about him being some adversary that you had to get past. They talked to him about, they said they loved the fact that Mike Madigan was always a straight shooter. He said what he meant. He didn't lie to them. He wasn't dishonest. He came straight at him with what he wanted to do and what he wanted to get accomplished. And he was always available to make a deal. And when you think about everything that's happened to Mike Madigan in the last just 5 years, from the Rauner administration to the failed fair tax to everything that happened what continues to happen with the ComEd scandal, people forget about how successful of a politician he was working across the aisle and getting things done for the state of Illinois.
And it looked like those days kind of came to an end, especially under Governor Bruce Rauner, who famously just had a horrible feud with him throughout his entire 4 years in office. And in fact, Rauner told you something in your podcast about a lunch that he had with Madigan before he was governor. What did he say?
Yeah, I didn't, this, and a lot of people in Springfield would be like, they know this, but, Governor Rauner told me, and I got 4 of the 5, living governors to talk on the podcast. Blagojevich was the only one who declined. You
can get him on Cameo, Justin.
Don't think I didn't think about that, Paris. I was thinking but Governor Rauner talked about, his relationship with the speaker before he got into politics. He was Governor Rauner was Bruce Rauner, the philanthropist, and he was raising money for education and he was giving money to Democrats, including Speaker Madigan. And so they would meet for breakfast in the city and they'd get to know each other. And yeah, there were a couple times where Bruce Rauner told the story where he sat down with Mike Madigan and said, "Why do you do it? What is it? What, you don't want to be governor? Why do you want to continue to be Speaker of the House? What's in it for you?" And as the governor says, he says that Mike Madigan just said, it's no bigger than I manage power and I make money off of managing power. That was his philosophy. That was his ethos when it came to talking to, Bruce Rauner at a breakfast at the, Chicago Club downtown. And there's a lot of stories like that of people talking about Mike Madigan. Mike Madigan, this famously doesn't talk to the media much.
Right.
And so it's really hard to understand.
It certainly seems that was the ends and the means for Madigan, although very surprised that he would actually say that out loud because he's famously circumspect. Lastly, Justin, what is Madigan's lasting legacy now that he's gone?
That's what the core of this podcast is about. It's not a hit piece. It's about, is he the most successful and powerful politician in Illinois history, or is he this corrupt politician who was out for himself and the people around him, and he did that with any means necessary, including the taxpayer money? That's what we don't know. But in this podcast, we're kind of trying to figure out which one kind of, rises to the top and if they can be mutually exclusive. And that's kind of what we get into. And at the end of the day, I'm not sure I have an answer for you, Paris. You might just have to listen to it.
Well, it seems like time will provide an answer to that. We'll see what the legacy looks like in 10 years or 20 years. All right, Justin Kaufman, thank you so much for being here. Good luck on the podcast. Congratulations on the Axios job, too, by the way. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And up next, the Chicago Children's Choir on their latest collaboration, so stay with us.
Spend Saturday evening with the Voices of Chicago. Latino voices at 6 and Black voices at 6:30. See you on Saturdays. And there's much more ahead on the program, including Joanna Hernandez in North Lawndale and a look at the upcoming match between the Bears and the Packers. But first, since it was founded back in 1956, the Chicago Children's Choir has grown from a single choir to a vast network of singers across the city. Its latest recording speaks to the resilience of young people working together to raise each other's voices. Mark Vitale has the story.
We are strong, shoulder to shoulder, keep moving on.
From Hyde Park to Humboldt Park, the Chicago Children's Choir is everywhere, with some young folks still learning about music and others on a career path.
Don't stop this train.
Now the choir has joined forces with the Q Brothers for the new record, Long Way Home, a musical odyssey and love letter to the city.
It's Friday afternoon, we're making music on the block.
We collaborate with so many great artists and cultural institutions in our city, nation, and the world. With the Q Brothers, this was a really special, unique opportunity to create with them, with the singers. So they came in from the beginning to workshop several scenes.
That's because the album began as a staged show pre-pandemic.
Well, now it's time to settle the score. Hey!
In the theater, the Q Brothers have a reputation for rap adaptations of Shakespeare and more.
We've always written for ourselves to perform in, and we've always done the bare minimum of casting. So 4 of us play 20-some characters. This is the first time somebody said, we have 100 people for you to cast in this and 100 voices to use that all know how to sing and can sing in 8-part harmonies. Like, what a dream.
Chicago Children's Choir was born out of the Civil Rights Movement in 1956. We've impacted over 50,000 young people. What started out as one choir in Hyde Park is now a network of over 100. We have partnerships with Chicago Public Schools. We have after-school satellites throughout the city.
One former choir student is the singer Kia, who we spoke with before her performance at the Pitchfork Music Festival.
It taught me a lot about what it meant to just be exposed to music and like having to sing, but like be in tune with your neighbors and sing the harmony parts. But I also think it taught me a lot about what it means to be like a working musician. I'm really grateful for that because I feel like it really seasoned me for now.
Once in a while when it's good, it'll feel like it should.
They are all learning how to become not only musicians but global ambassadors, leaders, ambassadors of their neighborhood. That's the power of music, to unify all of us, right? Despite our differences, religious, sexual orientation, or otherwise, like socioeconomic, that music is this force that brings us all together and connects and unites us and helps us celebrate our shared humanity.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
And the new record, The Long Way Home, is out now. And this Saturday, the Chicago Children's Choir hosts a virtual concert, Red Jacket optional, which they call the most inspirational concert of the year. Special guests include jazz vocalist Kurt Elling and the operatic baritone Jonathan Green. You can find out more on our website. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, more on the nonprofit working to make biking accessible for North Lawndale residents. Comic books and inclusion. We discuss the announcement that Superman's son, John Kent, is bisexual. And the Bears and the Packers resume the oldest rivalry in football as Green Bay looks to extend a 4-game winning streak at Soldier Field on Sunday. But first, some more of today's top stories. The family of a man shot and killed by a sheriff's deputy in Michigan has filed a civil suit against the county for his death. Oscar Herrera was shot and killed in April when the sheriff's office was called to his home in Hillsdale County, Michigan, over complaints about his dog. Attorneys for the family say the deputy violated the Constitution using unreasonable deadly force and failing to render medical treatment when he shot and killed 32-year-old Herrera as well as his dog. Family members joined attorneys in announcing the suit.
To speak of Oscar in the past tense is still unnatural, 169 days later. Even more unnatural is a young man survived by his mother and grandmother. We are meant to bury our elders, not the other way around.
Chicago Public Schools says its efforts to recruit and retain teachers is paying off in the low-income communities that have struggled to keep high-quality teachers. The district says its Opportunity Schools initiative has increased early career teacher retention from 56% 5 years ago to 82% this school year. And of the 800 teachers placed in Opportunity Schools over the last 3 years, more than 2/3 have been in hard-to-staff subjects like special education, and at least half are teachers of color. CPS says it plans to grow from its current 78 neighborhood opportunity schools to 100 by the year 2024. And Loyola University joins a growing list of businesses, governments, nonprofits, and universities to announce they plan to divest from companies that derive a majority of their revenue from fossil fuels. In a letter to the Loyola community, the Jesuit University says its new sustainable investment policy also plans to actively seek investment in companies working to reduce carbon emissions and address climate change. Nationwide, 127 universities have announced plans to divest from fossil fuels as well. And nearly 74% of Chicagoans have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. The Chicago Department of Public Health's Protect Chicago 77 initiative aims to have at least 77% of all Chicagoans ages 12 and over to at least have started their COVID vax series by the end of the year. As of October 9th, CDPH says more than 1.7 million people have. Among the 77 community areas for which the campaign is named, West Englewood and West Garfield Park had the biggest increases in first-dose vaccine coverage in the last week. And now, Paris, we go back to you.
All right, Brandis, thanks. And now we check back in with Joanna Hernandez, who spent the day in North Lawndale as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Joanna, what do you got?
Now, thanks, Paige. We're now here with Mike Trout, Executive Director of Wyman. Thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Thank you for having us. Great, Joanna.
So I want to start off with Robert. You know, he shared his story, how he had a vision about this bike box. How has that feeling been for you to watch him grow up? You watched him since he was a kid. Now he's in his 30s and he's come back to run the bike box. How is that feeling for you?
I mean, we are so proud of Robert, as well as the other indigenous emerging leaders from the North Lawndale community that are using their giftedness to reinvest and make this a special neighborhood.
So tell me a little bit more about how this bike box started to come about.
Well, one of the beautiful things about North Lawndale is the collaborative way stakeholders and institutions work together. So obviously it was a vision of our young people, but then we had other groups come on board, UCAN and Boxing Out Negativity and Equiticity and Working Bikes. And we all worked together to create this vision of having a place where people could come and access bikes for free to be able to take out and ride throughout the neighborhood.
And have you seen a difference? Have you seen more and more people riding bikes in the neighborhood?
Absolutely. 10 years ago, you would rarely see a bike through the community, and now so many people are riding bikes. We have new bike lanes. The city has invested resources, and our goal is to make North Lawndale the most bike neighborhood in the city of Chicago.
Why was this important for you and for everyone else who participated?
Well, my wife is a science teacher, so she would say mechanical energy, just getting people out and active and doing things like that. But, you know, the fundamental building blocks of any community are the relationships. And it's difficult when you're driving a car or a bus or a train to build those relationships. But when you're on a bike going through the city streets, your neighborhood streets, you're seeing grandmas on the porch, you're seeing guys walk dogs, you're seeing kids go to school. And that's the way we build community. It's by building those relationships. And getting on bikes gives us access not only to appreciating the neighborhood, but building those key relationships.
So right next door to the bike box, there is a community garden that was made out of a container as well. Can you tell me a little bit about the collab between Wyman and the Chicago Architecture Biennial?
Yeah, Chicago Architectural Biennial came to us and said, we love the bike box idea, the container that you have here. Not only can you borrow bikes, but you can fix bikes, even purchase bikes here. What if we take a container and design an art installation, an architectural art installation using the container motif? So they had an artist from New York, and they cut up this container. It's a beautiful, just shared space for artistic expression, for yoga, for art classes, for community gatherings. And then our young people, our students, painted and added the color to that project. So it was a collaboration between outside artists and architectural experts and the kids of our neighborhood.
So last question I want to ask you here. You are one of the founders of Wyman and have lived here for many years. Now, how do you aim to reach youth here in North Lawndale?
We've been here 30 years, and we've been working with about 300 youth every year. And reaching the youth are not a problem, but our goal is to adequately equip them to become the leaders of this neighborhood. We believe that the answers to North Lawndale are already here, and all we have to do is provide the investment in these young people and watch them grow in their community leadership.
How does that make you feel, again, when you watch them grow and they come back and they have all these different positions that they probably didn't think they could obtain?
Well, it's our mission at the Young Men's Educational Network, but it's also a personal passion. So, yeah, to see them take over positions of community leadership brings me great joy.
Well, thank you, Mike, for joining us.
Thank you,
Have
Joanna,
a good
for
night.
being here.
All right, now up next, we're talking about a young local high school principal and how he is determined to make an impact on students' lives. We send it back to you in the studio.
All right, Joanna, we'll look forward to that. And now back to Brandis and some big news from the world of superhero comics. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. Comic book creators appear to be making efforts to be more inclusive. Earlier this week, DC Comics announced John Kent, the Superman of Earth and son of Clark Kent and Lois Lane, is bisexual. In the November 9th issue of Superman, son of Kal-El, John Kent strikes up a friendship and eventual romance with reporter Jay Nakamura. Now, some have applauded the move, while others worry it could just be a short-lived publicity stunt. Joining us now with more are Anna Peppard, an author and researcher who's explored race, gender, and sexuality in comic books. Justin Hall, a comic book creator and chair of the Graduate Comics program at the California College of the Arts. And Robert Elder, Chief Digital Officer for the Chicago-based Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and the author of Hemingway in Comics, as well as a number of other books. Welcome all of you to Chicago Tonight. Welcome back, Rob. So let's start with you, please. Rob Elder, what is your reaction to the announcement? Is this a big deal?
It's a big deal. I was just talking with my 13-year-old daughter about this. It's perhaps a little long overdue. Queer superheroes aren't new anymore. But it is interesting that we're getting sort of that representation in a major DC Comics series involving their flagship character, Superman, and that's newsworthy. I think that is a big deal.
Anna Peppard, are you worried that this is just potentially a publicity stunt to sell comics?
I think it's always worth worrying about that when we have what we think of as like a legacy superhero, so one of the big name superheroes being replaced with what we call a quote-unquote more diverse character. And by more diverse, we just mean not a cisgendered, straight, white male superhero. Time and time again, that kind of happens, that one of these characters gets replaced with a more diverse character, and it tends to revert back when the company decides they want to, for nostalgia and marketing reasons, go back to that classic version of the character. So there's reason to be suspicious about it, and I know a lot of fans are nervous about that.
Justin Hall, to that end, you're a comic book creator and an academic. What does it say if it is, maybe just the second or third sort of generation of the character, or even maybe a sidekick character in a more mainstream comic, that is the character who quote unquote comes out to be, bisexual or a member of the LGBTQ community?
Well, it's certainly not surprising that they wouldn't use Clark Kent himself, the kind of primary person a character who has the Superman name to be a queer representative. But I think it's so important that a character named Superman has a queer identity. But I would also say that it's important for us to also acknowledge that openly bisexual creators have been creating bisexual characters in comics for many, many decades. You have people like Roberta Gregory and Lee Mars creating queer underground comics with bisexual characters from the early 1970s onwards. So this is really important. I think a moment of kind of cultural gravitas with a character like Superman. But let's also remember that the pioneers of this sort of material and representation have been around for a long time.
Rob, what can you tell us about John Kent? He is actually, as we've discussed, Superman's son. And what can you tell us about this upcoming November 9th issue?
So I haven't seen it yet, but the character himself is relatively new. He's been around since about 2015, and he's a typical teen in a lot of ways. But if your dad was Superman, it might be sort of a tough act to live up to. So he's struggling with that and kind of deciding what kind of Superman he's going to be.
Okay. Justin, you've created several comics. Tell us a little bit more. You've kind of touched on it already about the world of queer comics.
They've been around for quite a while. I mean, you can look back at the underground comics movement, and even before that, the gag strips that appeared in the early queer publications coming out of Stonewall, and even before. So queer comics have been around for a while. They've been, since the late middle '60s. I would say is really a starting point. And they were initially really by and for queer communities, so created by creators who identified as such, and it was really a conversation within queer communities. And so it's interesting to see them, queer characters and representation, finally coming out into the mainstream. For a long time, the mainstream of superhero comics completely eschewed all queer characters and themes, so the only people making this sort of work were underground creators. So it does represent a social and cultural shift when we have mainstream characters and creators working on this kind of material.
And Anna Peppard, in the past, have you observed comic book culture to be less than inclusive?
Yes, that would be a fair euphemism for comic book culture in the past. I mean, you can think about the stereotype of the Simpsons comic book guy, right? There's a little bit of truth to a stereotype like that. I mean, in terms of how slow superhero comics have been to sort of adapt to the diversity of our world, that's very much true. And comic book culture has been slow to adapt to the diversity of our world in a lot of ways as well. I mean, Justin's absolutely right that queer comics have existed as long as comics has existed, as long as queer people have existed, basically. And yet, we had something called the Comics Code that prohibited a lot of mainstream publishers, so those not being sold sort of in the underground context, from depicting what was then coded as perverse sexual relationships, by which they meant any LGBTQ relationships. That wasn't changed until 1989, and you didn't have the first gay superhero until a couple of years after that in North Star at Marvel Comics, and it's been very, very slow going since then to sort of diversify these universes. So there's a reason why this news is a big deal. It's a big deal because it's Superman, because it's their flagship character, and to be honest, representation being what it is in the superhero genre, it's getting better, but representation being what it is, it's always a big deal when we have another character who is representing that diversity of our world that should be represented in all types of media.
And Anna, sticking with you for a second, former Superman actor Dean Cain, he played Superman on the small screen in the 90s. He's called this move, quote, jumping on the bandwagon. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I don't know how it's jumping on the bandwagon to, as I said, represent the diversity of our world in a world that hasn't represented that diversity very well throughout its history. So bisexual people have always been here. They're not a trend. They're not going away. So I don't really see how that's bandwagon jumping.
Rob Elder, what's your reaction to that?
I can't say it any better than that. And, you know, Dean has sort of become far right since his, you know, time in the Cape. So I think those views are part of that.
And it's a good bandwagon to jump on.
and Justin Hall, you know, do you hope or do you expect that comic book, you know, the superhero culture, that it will continue to reflect the society that we live in?
Absolutely. I mean, representation matters. It's extremely important. And, you know, I would say that the job of superhero comics is to entertain. It's not really, it doesn't need to do the work of someone like an Alison Bechdel and Fun Home, or, you know, which really kind of dives into queer identities and issues in a more analytical or, you know, kind of complex way. But we need representation that especially young people are going to be able to look at and see themselves mirrored back in the media that they consume. So this is, we can only hope that this is a trend that will continue, and that this bandwagon will, you know, keep on growing, because it's a good thing to have representation.
All right, it's a good place to leave it as well. My thanks to Anna Peppard, Justin Hall, and Robert Elder for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And up next, more from Joanna Hernandez in North Lawndale. But first, a look at the weather. And now we check back in with Joanna Hernandez, who spent the day in North Lawndale as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Joanna.
Now, thanks, Brennan. We're now here with the principal of North Lawndale College Prep, Dion Owens. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
So good, thank you. So I want to start off with, this is your first official school year as a principal of the Collins campus. What has your vision been this year?
Absolutely. My vision has really been bifold. One, reorienting students into an environment conducive to academic excellence, as well as rigorous instruction. Secondly, making sure that we're infusing character education and social emotional learning to combat the very traumatic experiences induced by the pandemic.
And this is also the second year your school has been open for in-person learning since COVID hit. Why was it a priority for you to continue in-person learning?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about the community that we serve, a primarily African-American, minoritized, and marginalized community, it was a no-brainer for us to open our doors to the students who need and deserve education the most. It was a difficult feat ensuring that we were COVID ready in a year where we had no model, and we became the model. But our dedicated CEO and our dedicated team spent long nights to ensure that we were able to open our building simply because our students need it and deserve it.
And what has the school year been like now? Has contact tracing been an issue, or do you feel that you guys have handled it pretty smoothly.
I think that bringing students back last year really allowed us to have a head start in which students understand what the expectations are in the building, even though they may seem rudimentary at many times. And so with that respect, I believe that we have it kind of like down packed for this school year, using last year as a learning lesson.
And you are a young principal. You're 27 years old. I have to ask, what drives your passion to serve as a principal for the students of North Lawndale?
Yeah, absolutely. I myself am a Chicago Public Schools student from a very marginalized community similar to North Lawndale College Prep. And as I always tell my students, it was education that saved me. And it's really education that allows me to be on this platform and working with the students that I do today. And so knowing that, I know that education can be transformational in my students' lives and change the trajectory of them and their families. And so that's what drives my passion every day.
Would you say that you are an example to them?
Absolutely. I think that oftentimes people look at my age and they're often, shocked by it, but the actual proves the possible. And here I am as a 26-year-old principal and doing the work and showing my students that they can do it too.
And what's something that you want to accomplish at the school?
Yeah, one thing that I really want to accomplish is the increase in AP courses that our students are taking, but more importantly, our students really focusing on that social emotional learning aspect of what does it mean to be personally resilient and knowing that that is going to be a key lever in preparing them for college graduation. And so building them up, building up their character with that form of education.
And I want to quickly ask, of course, this area has dealt with gun violence in the area. How does your school aim to respond and support students who experience the ripple effects of gun violence?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a robust Peace Warriors program in which we really train our students on the Kingian principles of nonviolence, in which they are the disruptors of violence in our neighborhoods and the promoter of peace. And so really embodying for students kind of like a spirit of peace in our school, but then also taking that out into the streets. Secondly, primarily through education. We understand that education is the great equalizer, and the number one expector of life expectancy is years of education, and so making sure that our students are fully educated and that they're able to then go on to college to extend that education and then come back into their communities to disrupt the violence that they experience now.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for joining us here, Dion Owens.
I appreciate it, Josanna.
Well, that is all we have here from North Lawndale. Thank you for joining us. Brandis, back to you.
And Joanna, thank you. Up next, we preview the Bears' Sunday matchup against their longtime rivals. But first, a look at some events happening around town this weekend.
Justin Fields and the Bears have back-to-back wins, but the rookie quarterback faces his toughest test so far as he takes on Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers at Soldier Field on Sunday. And joining us now to help preview the game is James Big Cat Williams, former offensive lineman for the Chicago Bears from 91 to 2002. Hey, Big Cat, welcome back.
Hey, Bears, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for being here. So, it turns out that the last Bears game was the last game for Raiders head coach John Gruden after these emails showing misogynistic and racist and homophobic contents come out. What do you make of this whole situation?
Well, for me, the interesting thing is going to be a little further down the road when the other shoe drops. You have people like that sending out emails. Who's he sending these emails to? It has to be a like-minded people. So, I think that's going to be the interesting part of it. Not only that, but, John Gruden wasn't even really a part of the initial investigation. The initial investigation was into the Washington football team and, their discrimination and other events that went on as far as cheerleaders had to go. So, for all this to come out about Gruden, you have to think that somebody had an axe to grind, and for some odd reason, Gruden was in somebody's crosshairs.
Certainly seems that you see this in political corruption cases all the time. He was just kind of an ancillary part of it, but it seems like there's a much deeper story here. All right, well, let's move on to the fun stuff, the football. It's Packers week. Obviously, the fans love this rivalry. They get really souped up for it. Do the players feel that rivalry?
Well, for me, it's a little different. You know, I came in the 90s, and a lot of the older guys were still there. Your Richard Dents, your Steve McMichaels, your Singletaries. So the ability for players to change teams had not blown up as much as it has now. So now you have a lot of players, that know each other. They're friends. They get along with each other. They do things together during the off season. They might have played together somewhere else. So I think it's still a rivalry, but it's just a little different rivalry than it used to be back when, everybody that was on the field was trying to kill each other.
Right, maybe not the same bitterness toward one another that the fans might feel for Green Bay's fans. I mean, it's been a lopsided rivalry. Really hasn't been a rivalry at all in recent years. The Bears are 3-19 against the Packers since 2011. The Bears have had 16 quarterbacks since Rodgers took over. Do you think they finally changed that narrative here with Josh Fields?
Well, you have to hope. You have to hope so. We had that hope with Trubisky, and now you have a young Fields in here. He still has a long way to go. He has a lot to learn and a lot to improve on. But we have to hope that he's the future. And if he's the future, hopefully that future is looking bright because he's a different type of athlete, and that's what we want to see. That's what we've been. That's what we have not had in years to ever.
Yeah, right. I think that's a good time frame there. Last week they didn't ask him to do that much, although he took quite a beating. But the Bears really focused on running the ball and holding the ball for time of possession. Is that the formula to beat the Packers too, or are they going to have them air it out a little more?
Well, I think you're going to have to do a little bit of both. You're going to have to run the ball. You're going to have to eat up clock. You're going to have to be efficient on third down because you want to keep the two Aarons and Devontae off the field. You do not want that Packers offense on the field just because of the possibilities of what they can do. So the better the Bears can run the ball, the better the Bears can eat up the clock, the better the Bears can, stay ahead of the chains. It's all beneficial for them.
Yeah, he tweaked his knee there on that last run. I hope they keep him healthy. Defensively, you're going up against maybe the best in the business, a guy that always has the Bears number, and Aaron Rodgers. What do you think the defense is talking about this week to at least contain him?
Well, you think they've got to be talking about being able to put pressure on him. We talked last week about Carr and the statements made by the Chargers as far as, if you can hit him a couple times, he starts to flinch. And, that's anybody. You put anybody back there at quarterback, and if they get hit too many times, they're going to flinch a little bit. Rodgers is a little better at it than others. But if you're able to get Mac free, if you're able to get Quinn off the edge, if if Smith's able to blitz and, get some hits on the quarterback, they don't all have to be sacks. But if you're able to get through, get into his face, put pressure on him, try and move him around in the pocket, even though he throws well on the move, it bodes well for the Bears defense.
And it seems like that defense has been gelling in recent weeks. Are you happy with the direction it's going? You think it's kind of forming an identity now?
Yeah, I think it is. I think Coach Desai's done a good job of finding the strengths of his team and getting them to all play together, getting all levels to match, getting that D-line, the linebackers, corners and safeties, getting them all to play together and in sync. So, like last week, their ability to bring a lot of people up to the offensive line and give them different looks and force them to change some of their calls and then only rush four. Now you have to choose. You have to figure out as an offensive lineman who those four are going to be. But, that's easier said than done when you've got a whole lot of angry people standing up there weighing about 290 pounds to 350 trying to get to your quarterback.
It's one of the broadcasters say that's a lot of meat up there. All right, so we only have a couple seconds. Your prediction, fearless prediction.
Unfortunately, I want to go with the Bears. I think they stand a good chance. I think that Fields and that offense should be able to move the ball, but I just worry about Rodgers in the fourth quarter if the game is close. So I've got to go 24-21 Green Bay.
Yeah, Rodgers is deadly if the game's anywhere close and they have like 30 seconds or more to get in the field goal range, as we've seen. All right. Our thanks to James Big Cat Williams. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Bears.
You bet. And check out our website to see Big Cat try and name all 16 starting quarterbacks the Bears have had since 2008, the year Aaron Rodgers took over from Brett Favre as the Packers starter. That's WTTW.com/news. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing, and you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7 for the Weekend Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.
She was the ultimate agitator and feared because of it.
As racial terror reigned over the South, a young African-American woman struck back with her pen.
There was